I am also recording.
Okay, so and is yep, showing recording. We had a problem with one the other night, so I just want to keep an eye on that.
Sure.
So hello everyone. My name is Jeff Leeper. I'm the city councillor. I haven't had a chance to take a look at the participants list, but there are 17 of you joining us this evening, which is a nice manageable number. And I apologize. Normally, I've been doing a lot of these open houses using Zoom for development application files. So we're going to use the same format. I think this is the first time that Emma Kenny in the office, one of the first times she's driving this one. So it might be a little bit loosier-goosier than Fiona's strict adherence to the protocols. We are here to take a look at the Byron Avenue, Athlone Avenue, and Highcroft Avenue integrated water work. It's a pretty significant project with a lot of elements. So the first order of business is to ask the team to take you through the presentation. For these sessions, what we're doing is we are asking people to use the Q&A. So in order to pose a question, there is at the bottom a Q&A button. And if you type into the Q&A with your question, it will sit there until someone answers it. So once the staff, who I'll let Kevin introduce the team, but once staff have run through the presentation, we'll then go into the question and answer session. And because we are recording this, we will be putting the session up on YouTube. So it is important that you type that question in. We're going to address the question orally in asking it, so that if somebody is watching the video, they'll be able to get all the questions and answers that are in there. Did we put a time on when this is closed? 8:30?
Yeah, 8:30.
That's correct.
So we'll start wrapping it up as we approach 8:30, and we'll talk about next steps in terms of input towards the end. But rather than me chat for forever, I'll turn it over to I'm guessing Kevin, who is with the city, who can introduce the team and then take us through the presentation.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Gibbs. I'm the project manager for this project. I'll be managing the project throughout its life of the project, from the preliminary design where we're at right now, through to detailed design, tenders, construction, and closeout. So if anyone has any questions or concerns or issues, come and see me. So let me introduce you to the project team. The program manager for the city is Franco Bonanno. Franco is my superior. He manages other project managers who report to the Director of Infrastructure Services. And this project here, we're presently in the preliminary design stage, and our design team is composed of our consultant design project manager, Robert Cotnam, and the contract administrator for Robinson, the same firm, Robinson Associates, Jeremy Kearns. So Robert and Jeremy are part of the design team that have started the design process following the project charter, which was established for this project, and will continue right through from design, preliminary design, to detailed design, to construction. So essentially, this is an infrastructure renewal project, and it's primarily driven by the age and the stated conditions of the existing infrastructure. The water mains and sanitary sewers, some of which are over 80 years old, have reached the end of their life expectancy and are at the point where it's better to replace them now before they start breaking and have unplanned breaks and emergencies, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, it's an underground infrastructure project. It's driven by the age of the infrastructure, and we have to replace it immediately. Also included in the project, we have some improvements for the roadways. We have the latest design for a protected intersection, a fully protected intersection at Byron and Kirkwood. We have a pedestrian crossing planned at Byron and Tweedsmuir. And we have implemented the city's latest policy on engineered local streets to 30 kilometers an hour. So there's multiple implementations for traffic calming, road width reduction, speed humps, raised intersections, raised crosswalks, and some narrowing of the street. So we'll get into the details this shortly. We also have some improvements to the cycling infrastructure. We have cycle tracks on Byron, and we're really happy to show you how that's going to work at the Byron and Kirkwood intersection. In addition to that, we have some landscaping improvements. We'll be doing some redesigning of the on-street parking on Byron near Churchill. And so that's about it in overall project scope for the project. In terms of project costs, we're presently preliminary design construction cost estimates are approximately $8.3 million for the actual construction work. In terms of the schedule, we're looking at proceeding with detailed design over the winter to be in a position to tender in the spring and as early as possible to benefit from early tenders and a full construction season in the summer of 2021. So there is sufficient amount of work that we'll need two full construction seasons to install the underground pipes and make all the connections to the services. And we'll follow with a third season just for the top coat on the second season's work. So we have Robert Cotnam is going to explain the details, all the engineering details of this project. And please, as Councillor mentioned, use the question and answers chat function on the Zoom meeting here to log in your questions. And we'll be answering all the questions after the presentation. So just write down your questions as they come up and we'll answer them at the end. All right, that's it. Robert.
Thanks, Kevin. Good evening, everyone. So as Kevin mentioned, oops, sorry here. Let me give a quick overview of the agenda on the project. I go through a little bit of details on the underground services, touch on the road design, highlight a few of the key features such as the pedestrian and cycling facilities, traffic calming measures, and some of the on-street parking elements. I'm gonna go through some of the landscape impacts and highlight some of the new plantings, touch on project or traffic management, sorry, and then review the next steps before we get into the question and answers. So as Kevin mentioned, this project is being driven as an underground project, being an integrated road reconstruction. It starts with the underground works, and because of the extent of the underground works, it warrants the full reconstruction of the surface. Because taking advantage of that reconstruction, we're able to implement traffic calming measures in accordance with the Byron Avenue traffic calming design and the city's road safety initiatives, and provide enhanced cycling accommodations through the corridor, as well as bringing the pedestrian accommodations up to current city standards. Just a quick key plan to give a general overview of the project limits. Our project is Byron Avenue, extending from the Highcroft intersection through to Hilson in the east, as well as Highcroft from Byron to Clare, and Athlone from Byron to the dead end, with the water main extension through the Clare Gardens Park. And I will note that there is a little bit of work on Byron Place as well. That is being coordinated with the developers of that parcel of land there. So just quickly to run through the underground services for the project. As Kevin mentioned, the system is quite old. It's around 80 years old and reached the end of its serviceable life. So as such, we'll be replacing the existing sanitary sewer with a new 250 millimeter sewer from Churchill to the hydro corridor, and then 250 to 450 from the hydro corridor to Hilson, as well as a new 200 millimeter water main throughout Byron. For Athlone, similar situation, sanitary sewer is quite old, being replaced with the 250 sanitary sewer from Byron Avenue to the dead end, as well as the water main, the 200 millimeter water main from Byron to Clare through the park there. And Highcroft is limited to just the 200 millimeter water main. sewer there is not quite as old and still in good state, so it doesn't warrant replacement. So just to give a general sense of the extent of the underground work, you can see in blue is the water main basically from Highcroft to Tweedsmuir. It's along the north edge of the road where it switches over to the south side from Tweedsmuir through to the limit of the project at Hilson. Sanitary sewer starts on the south side of the corridor, and then at Tweedsmuir it switches over to the approximate center of the corridor. And as I mentioned, there's that little bit of work on Byron Place that can provide connection to the Churchill services. For Athlone, we have the water main down the east side of the corridor with the link through the park. You can see there's some deviation in the alignment of the water main through the park. That was, I'll provide more detail on that, but that was to protect the existing trees in the park, and the sanitary sewer down the center. Highcroft Avenue, the works are limited to water main along the east curb line, so that'll be completed through trench reinstatement. So now just moving on to some of the highlights for the road design for Byron Avenue from Highcroft to Tweedsmuir, Tweedsmuir to Hilson, and then I'll touch on a few of the key features, including the Kirkwood intersection and the Byron Avenue parking bay. So for the road design from Highcroft to Tweedsmuir for Byron, we're providing 4-meter lanes with some localized narrowings down to 3.5 meters in accordance with the Byron Avenue traffic calming design and the additional measures from the city's road safety initiatives. Providing a 1.8-meter wide cycle track on both sides, the segregated cycling facilities to get the bikes off of the road. 1.8-meter sidewalk on the south side, bringing it up to the current design standards. And included with that is the 200-millimeter demarcation stone for the Accessibilities for Ontarians with Disabilities Act requirements. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that, but it's sort of it's a paver stone with a pattern on the top that's cane detectable to keep or provide guidance to visually impaired pedestrians, so they don't end up in conflict with the cycling facilities. Traffic calming measures, as I mentioned, speed humps, intersection narrowings, and raised crossings in accordance with the Byron Avenue traffic plan or traffic calming design, as well as the city's new initiatives. We've included a raised PXO type C at Tweedsmuir. Type C is the pedestrian activated flashing lights, the rapidly flashing beacons. And then, as I said, the on-street parking bay, Eden to Athlone, we've a few modifications of that as well. One of the key highlights here is the south side of the road. We provided a 1.5-meter boulevard between the cycle track and the curb line. The purpose of that is to provide adequate space for pole relocations to get them further away from the houses and outside of the pedestrian environment. They're currently kind of situated within the pedestrian space, so this will provide a less conflict within the sidewalk. And as I mentioned, the Byron Avenue Place reconstruction is currently being coordinated with the developers. So a little bit more detail on some of the design highlights. Between Byron from Tweedsmuir to Hilson, the 4.0-meter lanes narrowing to 3.5 again. 1.8-meter cycle tracks continuous on both sides, with the 1.8-meter sidewalk on the south side with the demarcation stone for the ODA requirements. As Kevin mentioned, there's a protected intersection at Kirkwood, and I'll provide a little bit more detail on that in a couple slides. Traffic calming measures, again, similar speed humps, intersection narrowings, and raised crossings. The PXO at Hilson will be maintained. That's the current limit of our project. So we're endeavoring to not impact that, but if we do happen to extend beyond it, it'll be reinstated. And then again, there's the 1.5-meter boulevard on the south side. There is no pole line through this section, but we do expect street lighting poles will need to be provided, so they'll be situated within that boulevard. Okay, so now some more sort of in-depth detail on some of these elements. The 1.8-meter cycle track, as I mentioned, it's the segregated facility keeping the cyclists off the roads. The upgraded sidewalk with the AODA demarcation stones, road narrowings at intersections as well as mid-block in some locations, speed humps at the locations outlined in the Byron Avenue traffic calming design, and then raised crossings at all intersecting streets with the exception of the protected intersection at Kirkwood. And as I mentioned, the 1.5 meter boulevard for utility relocations. Tweedsmuir intersection, we have the intersection narrowings again, as I mentioned, the raised crossings for both pedestrians and cyclists. The PXO type C, as I mentioned, the type C is the ones with the flashers. The configuration will be very similar to the one that's currently in place at Hilson. And the 1.8 meter cycle tracks, as I mentioned, with the sidewalk. Now the Kirkwood intersection. This is the protected intersection we mentioned. This is a new city design standard. It's referred to as a constrained design. It's a smaller footprint than the more, I hesitate to say traditional design for protected intersections because these are newer features. But this design standard is to be applied in situations where there's inadequate space to provide full AODA measures and pedestrian refuge between the cycle track and the road. So some of the key features of this are the raised cycle tracks on approach to the intersection, ramp down at the intersection with protected lanes around the perimeter of the intersection where cyclists would travel counterclockwise around. And they're protected from general traffic by these concrete islands. And again, there's the pedestrian and demarcation facilities incorporated as well. And then also I want to highlight the Byron Avenue linear park. We've provided the linkages to the existing pathway through there. Moving on to the Byron Avenue parking bay, a few modifications have been identified for this. One, curbing is provided for better definition to keep vehicles from encroaching in on the park further and damaging the park space. As well, it's been shortened up to reduce impacts on the park. There's some trees towards the east end of the park there that would have been impacted if the full bay had been reinstated. So it's been shortened up and better defined. Switching over to the Athlone Avenue corridor, some key features of the Athlone, 4.25 meter lanes with local narrowing down to 3 meters. The lanes are a little bit wider on Athlone because Athlone does support the on-street parking as opposed to the Byron Avenue where the lane widths are 3.75, I believe. 2 meter sidewalks down the west side of the road. A couple speed bumps mid-block, as well as a raised intersection at Wellesley. These are in accordance with the city's new traffic safety initiatives. There'll be the reconstruction of the Clare Garden Park pathway to accommodate the water main design. And then I'll zoom in here a little bit more detail for the corridor. 2 meter sidewalk along the west side, as I had mentioned. Raised intersection at Wellesley, with an intersection narrowing. And one feature of this intersection narrowing is the rather large tree in the southwest quadrant of the corridor there. It was flagged by city forestry as a showstopper for the project. So we've taken every measure we can to protect that tree. Including narrowing the road to pull the sidewalk and the roadway away from the yard. And we'll be looking at further design mitigation to ensure that that tree is protected through construction. For the mid-block section, narrowing to 3 meter lanes with the speed hump as mentioned. And then through Clare Gardens Park, the water main alignment, as I had noted, it kind of meanders a little bit. That's by design to protect the trees through the park. There's some very significant trees along the pathway. And then one element to point out is the park access will be maintained through construction. So the construction zone will be fenced off to keep the public away, but still allow access to the park. The 2 meter asphalt pathway will be reconstructed because of the water main construction, and the trees will be protected We've reviewed the alignment of the water main with both parks and forestry, and they're both satisfied with what we presented as a way of mitigating any impacts on the trees or the park for that matter. For Highcroft Avenue, some key elements here. It's a trench reinstatement where the existing road width is maintained. There is a narrowing at Clare identified as part of the traffic calming initiatives. There's a 1.8 meter concrete sidewalk extension. The current asphalt pathway along the east side of the core stops about 2/3 of the way to Clare. We're extending it all the way to provide that pedestrian link, and including speed humps for pedestrian or for traffic calming. Sorry. And as I mentioned, the Highcroft Byron Place intersection is being coordinated with the developers. It's our understanding that the development will be accessing off of Highcroft. As such, they've applied for some road modifications through the city and are spearheading that initiative. So our expectation is that their design will follow ours, and we will we'll just reinstate existing, and they will come by and build to suit their needs. Key features on Highcroft: the speed humps, as I mentioned, for traffic calming and intersection narrowing, and the extension of the sidewalk. As you'll note, the sidewalk does deviate to be behind the curb, and that is to protect some significant trees along the frontages through there. Now switching over to look at some of the landscaping impacts and new plantings. With projects of this nature, tree impacts are generally unavoidable. We have taken every initiative we can to protect all significant or mature trees and limit the impacts to less robust or less significant trees. So we've gone through with our landscape designer, identified all the tree impacts as well as new trees proposed. And as you can see from the summary table here, we are looking at about 23 trees will be impacted, and 89 new trees have been proposed, which results in a compensation ratio of almost 4-to-1 for every tree impact. It'll be 4 trees, almost 4 trees planted. So just to highlight some of the landscape elements, the final design of the Byron Place landscape is being coordinated with the developers, as I mentioned. The Byron Avenue parking bay has been reduced to mitigate impacts on the trees along the Byron section, the section of Byron between Eden and Athlone. And where there are a few trees that have still been impacted, there's been compensation trees provided. And I want to note there are some rather large private trees on private lands on the south side, which will be protected. Moving through Byron past Tweedsmuir and Bevan, there will be new trees all throughout the linear park identified. And then on approach to the Kirkwood intersection, there are a few minor trees on the frontages on the south side that'll be impacted, but compensation trees have been identified throughout. And at the intersection of Kirkwood, there's some trees nearby the pathway. Our pathway design has been designed to ensure that those trees can be protected as well. Looking at Athlone, large trees, as I mentioned, particularly that one in the southwest quadrant or sorry, this is Highcroft. I jumped ahead there. Highcroft looking at providing new trees where possible, as well as protecting the existing trees. As I mentioned, the sidewalk will be shifted to behind the curb to protect the large trees on the frontages on approach to Clare. There's a couple of rather large ones there that city forestry was quite concerned with protecting. So we've modified the design to ensure that those are protected. Now looking at Athlone, the rather large tree in the corner of Wellesley and Athlone, as I mentioned, will be protected. And again, a few trees have been noted as impacted, but significant compensation throughout. And then Clare Gardens Park, the water main alignment has been situated to ensure that, in an effort to protect all the trees and maintain the trees in the park, as well as provide a bunch of compensation. So that sort of covers the landscape side of it. Now looking at the traffic management during construction. The traffic management plan is currently in development with the city. We don't expect any full road closures as part of this project, but lane reductions and flagging operations are likely unavoidable. With that, the cycling and pedestrian service will be continuous. Temporary facilities or detourings will be provided as necessary to ensure that full connectivity for cyclists and pedestrians at all times. Transit service is on Clare and Kirkwood, and that will be maintained at all times as well. Looking at the cycling element of it, we do know that cycle detouring may be necessary, but fortunately there is the Wesley corridor nearby Byron. So the signed detour we expect will be along Wesley using Hilson, Wesley, Highcroft to get through the project zone. But I do note there is the linear park through there as well for the less confident or leisure cyclists to access or to traverse the project site. I think the signed detour route, the on-street route, will follow the Hilson, Wesley, Highcroft alignment. Next step in schedule, as Kevin mentioned, we're going through the consultation process now through December and into January with the comments received. Our detailed design will be initiating into February through the spring, with that tendering in the spring, with construction to initiate in late spring, early summer, and continue through fall 2021. Our expectation is the Byron Avenue corridor will be constructed first, with Tweedsmuir to the hydro corridor this year, and then through next construction season, the remainder of Byron plus the Athlone and Highcroft works. And then there is a potential for some carryover into 2023 to provide final lift pavings, the traffic calming, some of the traffic calming measures like speed humps, as well as the landscaping elements. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kevin, the councillor, for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. So lots of questions in the Q&A. And I'm going to ask Emma to take those through us. Emma, so you know the answer live button and all. Okay, perfect.
Great.
So
the first question reads, the community would like to receive assurances from the city that the city will return to the community before finishing design to provide the community with opportunity to see how comments were addressed and the design changes and design changed to meet community needs.
Okay, I'll answer that. We will be answering all these questions, and we can identify all the changes to the present design and which questions have been integrated into the design, so that we could post on the project website. So we're going to have a list of all the questions, and we're going to identify what actions were taken with each question. So that's how we'll address that. And I just want to remind everyone, as has been mentioned, if you put comments in the chat function on the Zoom meeting, can you please transfer it over into the Q&A? That way it'll get registered. It may not get registered in the chat function. So just a friendly reminder.
Thank you so much. Our next question asks, can the city contact names be shared with tonight's participants after the information session? Absolutely.
I'm the project manager for the project, so I'm responsible for the delivery of the project to ensure that it meets all the city requirements for public consultation, Ministry Environment approval process, for permit to take water, et cetera, and I will be coordinating this with the city forestry folks. We've already started that coordination consultation, and if you have any questions, please address them to me. Preferably by email, so I can have an exact description of your question, and if you can do that, I'll respond within 24 hours. And during construction, I'll still be the project manager, and I'm available for any questions you may have, or any concerns, or if you're moving, or if there's a project that you have that we have to coordinate with the contractor. If there's any special events going on in the community, please contact me and we can coordinate that together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll also be sure to share the city's project website in the newsletter and on our social media, which also has contact information in it as well. The next question, are they going to put water in Clare Gardens Park, maybe a water fountain?
Yes, that's a great idea. We'll have to look at, we've already started looking into that. I've already contacted the Parks and Recreation folks to find out how we can go about to do that. It's outside the project scope in the sense that we're just looking at looping the dead end water main to improve the flow. But the city has a policy of, what's the requirements for a water fountain, and it's not just simply installing a water fountain, but we have to make sure it's done in such a fashion that it's part of the city operational procedures. There's operational procedures to shut down the water fountain every year, so it requires a drain. We have to see where we can connect the drainage of that water fountain. So it's not just that we can just simply install a water fountain, and there's a bit of investigation to be done prior. So we're already looking into it, and we'll be able to respond shortly.
I'll just add, I'm very keen on seeing the addition of a water fountain project. That's been brought up with my office, and we've asked Kevin and the team to take that very seriously. So that's something that I'll be pressing on as well through the course of the design. There are probably going to be some funding questions, although with everything dug up, that makes everything cheaper. And I do have a little bit of CIL that I could probably throw into that project as well. So I've encouraged Kevin to find every way to try to make sure that that's possible.
Wonderful. Our next question reads, are you doing anything to the Byron linear path? Will the path be accessible during the construction?
Yes. So we're not doing any modifications to the path, except where the path connects up to the project limits. So at Kirkwood, where we connect to Kirkwood, the path where it connects at the PXO, the pedestrian crossing, and where the path connects to the parking on Byron. So there's no actual work on the main path itself. It's in good shape. It wasn't identified as requiring any type of intervention. Stated condition is good, and there's no capital projects for that pathway itself. And by removing the commuting cyclist onto the cycle tracks, the actual width of the pathway will be larger than actually what is required for just pedestrians. So there's no planned activity to do any work on the pathway other than where the pathway connects up to the project.
Great. Our next question.
If I may, when those connections are being made, there's a ton of kids who cycle along there, and a lot of other cyclists as well. People walking, obviously very heavy pedestrian traffic. What will the impacts for cyclists and pedestrians be when you're putting in, for example, the connection from the MUP into the intersection?
That's an excellent question. We'll have a very detailed traffic management plan, which will identify all the different signage and barricades and construction fences that will make sure that there's separation between the active pathways and the construction site. With respect to the actual connections, Robert, do you want to pull up the plan that shows the details of that, and perhaps you can address the details of how the pathway connects up to maybe perhaps start with Kirkwood?
Yeah, bear with me here while I switch screens.
We may have to put in a temporary bypass to connect across Kirkwood while we construct the connection? That's an excellent question. So we'll be looking at that in detail.
All right, is that visible to everybody now?
Mhm.
Can maybe just blow it up a bit?
Yeah, so zooming in there, as Kevin, apologies there, I'm highlighting things. As Kevin mentioned, there will be the linkages. Now these connections are still being refined to ensure the impacts on the park are limited. But while this is happening, there'll be some pedestrian barrier or the barrier fencing to ensure the work zone is inaccessible to pedestrians and cyclists, as well. Temporary facilities or temporary connections are expected. The exact details of that will be sort of fleshed out as the design progresses and we get into the staging elements of it.
Exactly. This is the preliminary design. We're looking at the big picture here and basic layouts. And as we proceed in detailed design, all the details for the connections and how we'll stage it in terms of, one part of this intersection will be constructed at a time. So, accessibility and usage are priority one for the city. So we want to make sure that we ensure that we have connectivity with the pathway on both sides of this intersection. And it's also accessible for people with mobility issues. So the details of that will be refined further in the detailed design. Robert, do you want to look a little bit to the east of here, to the west of here? I think where we connect up with.
There's an interconnection there.
Exactly.
At Bevan as well. Tweedsmuir is on the next drawing. I'll pull that up if you'd like, Kevin. There, just give me 1 second. And this is the Tweedsmuir. There, is that visible there to everyone?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So throughout, as we develop the detailed design, we're going to be looking at, the staging of this work, how we will proceed step by step. And as I mentioned, mobility concerns for the city of Ottawa is a #1 priority, not only in terms of its planned installations, but also during construction. And so this will be taken into account in the detailed design. Do you want to show a little bit further to the west, Robert? We have the other connection too as well.
And then the connection at the parking bay, as you mentioned there, Kevin.
Yeah. We actually have a team, a dedicated team at the city in our department that reviews all designs to ensure that they're AODA conforming. So specialized people that are specialized in reviewing and ensuring conformity for AODA requirements.
Wonderful. Are we ready for the next question?
Yes, please.
Great. So the next question reads, the raised crossings will pose difficulty for wheelchair users crossing Byron at Tweedsmuir.
You want to come and look at that intersection?
Moving over to it there now.
Okay. Well, what I can say is that this is just the preliminary design, and it's overall picture of what it's going to look like. Like I mentioned, we actually have experts, AODA experts on our team at the city that has reviewed projects such as this all over the town, and will ensure that they're conforming to AODA norms. So the elevations will be such that any slopes respect the norms for AODA. And in this case here, I believe that the grade elevation of the MUP, the multi-use pathway, is probably at grade with the crossing and connecting up to the sidewalk on the south side. So the details of that we'll develop it over a detailed design where we actually have cross-sectional views to see that the slopes are meeting all requirements.
Just to step in here, Kevin, as well, the benefits of the raised crossings are both the traffic calming element of it, but it does reduce the ramping required on approach to the crossings. So they're a little gentler going down and coming back up for people with mobility challenges, or even in winter conditions when things can get slick and slippery. So by adding the raised crossings, the expectation is it'll actually provide a high of accessibility. And as Kevin mentioned, this is all being vetted through with the AODA specialists at the city.
Wonderful. So our next question asks, why do we need speed bumps, street narrowing, and raised intersections on the Athlone section as a dead-end street with no cut-through traffic?
That's a good question. The city has enacted a policy of engineered 30-kilometer streets on all local streets, including dead ends. The idea is that 30 kilometers, although it sounds low, actually you can accelerate fairly quickly and achieve far greater than 30 kilometers just from turning the intersection and going down the street. So this is a citywide policy. It was enacted to improve the safety of all users, vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, and it's being applied across the city. So it's been proposed, these installations have been proposed by our traffic planning department, our experts in planning design for traffic calming. So we're implementing this city policy.
Wonderful. Our next question asks, oh, sorry, Jeff, I think you wanted to. Yeah.
Just quickly, I think, as we start to get further down the dead end there, certainly I was one of the councillors who voted for the 30K policy, and I'm glad to see that we are following that through rigorously. I think some of the features like the speed bump, as you get on the other side, we might start to get they have drawbacks as well. So I'll be interested in taking that. I'm thinking hard about that question. It's been raised by email with me, and will be subject to some further discussions between myself and the team.
Wonderful. So the next question asks, what is the rationale for the removal of existing mature trees? Our tree at 488 Athlone is shown to be removed on the current plan, and we would like to see this tree preserved.
Jeremy, can you pull up that section on the plan?
Bear with me 1 second here, Kevin, and I'll pull it up.
Okay.
On the
so
lands.
we did a detailed walkthrough with both the landscape architect and the city forestry specialist, identifying each tree, the stated condition of each tree, and essentially inventorying every tree and bush within the project right away that could be impacted. And we come up with a plan to minimize the removal of trees such that in some places the sidewalk has been adjusted, in other places the street has been narrowed. And so where's the location, Robert?
I believe it's the one that's labeled as 227 there. And just to shed a little bit of light on how these have been developed. This is the first pass based on the preliminary design. Our landscape architect has taken the plans and walked the site, and they've tried to guesstimate where the impacts will be. Now, as we move into the more detailed design, we'll get into trying to identify measures for mitigation. This is definitely one. It's a larger tree. It has been flagged as one that we would like to protect it if we can protect it through an engineered measure. So it's not a foregone conclusion it will be lost, But at this time, we just we take our best guess at where the impacts are going to be, and then we can use that as a jumping off point for further mitigation.
Okay, so here's an example of where we can, look at adapting the design to meet this type of requirement of trying to save a mature tree. So we take note, and we'll look at this very closely to see what we can do to save this tree.
I don't think 227 is necessarily, I'm not sure that is the tree that's being referred to. The 488 Athlone is actually, it looks like a shared tree almost on the property line between the city and the resident. It's pretty far back there. It's a little further north on the roll plan. But if the owner can write to me about 488, I'll make sure that we're raising that right to the project team, of course. But if you could do me a favor and copy me on that one, I'd be grateful.
Great.
I believe all my comments hold true for that. We'll evaluate all the impacts to see if there is further mitigation that we can provide.
Wonderful. Okay, our next question. In addition to being a raised intersection at Wesley and Athlone, will it also be a narrowed intersection?
Yes, there's a tree we're protecting right on the southwest corner, and we're actually pushing the sidewalk further into the street to protect that tree. So here's an example where we're actually doing two things at once. We're actually increasing the traffic calming by doing this, and obviously protecting the tree. Robert, is there anything else you want to jump in?
No, that covers it, Kevin. We're moving away from the tree as well. With the raised intersection brings the profile of the road up at that point, so there's less encroachment down on the routes. And we have flagged several trees throughout the corridor for, and we call it sort of an enhanced protection measure through construction, which would be the hydrovac excavation and other measures to try and limit any impacts on the root systems itself. And then in advance of the project, the city forestry group will likely go through and do some pre-pruning of the trees to help protect any impacts and try and preserve the trees as best we can. So we've gone through several measures, especially at this intersection, to A, provide the traffic calming, but B, protect that tree as well.
Wonderful. So our next question asks.
I just want to jump in. Yeah. Excuse me, Emma. I just want to jump in. Just to reassure everyone, also, if there's often what happens, there may be one or two roots that have to be cut, and what city forestry does, they trim the tree proportionally to the roots that are cut, so that the tree does not have less roots to supply the branches above. So if a root or two minor roots have to be cut, they'll cut them, and they'll trim the tree first, and then they'll cut the root. So the tree has a greater chance of surviving.
Excellent. So our next question asks, will there be a pathway through the park during construction from Athlone to Clare for cyclists passing through?
Yeah, Robert, you want to pull up that plan? So actually, we had a comment during our preliminary design that came up, and essentially requesting that there's access through the park, and to remind us that actually, I think it was Councillor brought this up. There will be kids playing in the park, and to make sure that there's a definite hard fence that separates the construction from the activities in the park. So we've taken note of that, and we've actually will have a hard fence that will be separating the park, the active park, from the active construction site. And so we'll need a temporary walkway to get around. As you can see, the current walkway is inside the fence, which would be under construction. So we'll put in a temporary pathway, and which cyclists can use as well to connect the dead end on Athlone to Clare to get around.
Wonderful. Our next question reads, with respect to Athlone, What will be the profile of the new curbs? Will it be the same along the total length, or will there be cuts for driveways?
Okay, Robert, do you want to answer that one in terms of the details of the curb?
Yeah, we're just moving into that level of detail now. The presumption is the sidewalk profile will be the city's ramp style sidewalk, where the pedestrian area is the uniform height with depressions at each individual entrance. Along the east side, where there is no sidewalk, it would be a standard barrier curb with the depressions at the at each entrance. That's the expectation, at least.
Okay. The next question asks, what happens to parking in front of the low-rise apartments on Athlone? The sidewalk will go in front of these areas.
Robert, do you want to bring up the plan on that?
Yeah,
So,
just bear with me here.
I think currently there's no parking on the south side, and there's only parking on the north side. And we're reducing the on-street parking near the Highcroft. Are we talking Highcroft or Byron?
On Athlone, I believe.
Athlone.
Oh, Athlone. Okay.
There's those
Okay,
few,
yes,
the parking or the apartment buildings towards the end of the corridor.
Right.
Our understanding is the frontage parking there is non-conforming. The parking area for those buildings is actually in behind. So it's sort of in accordance with the city's bylaws, that parking will be reclaimed for softscape for the city. I'm not sure if there's anything you can elaborate there on that, Kevin.
Yeah. Normally, whenever the city does such a infrastructure project, all non-conforming driveway entrances are converted back to conforming standards for the city bylaws for entrances. So what happens? A lot of people they expand their entrance on their own without getting approval from the city. So over the years, all these entrances that are non-conforming and not respecting the city bylaws for access have to be reconverted back into what is the standard for the city.
All right. Okay, our next question asks, when will construction on Athlone specifically begin and when will it be completed? The schedule seems to indicate staggered construction, which extends the construction on the dead-end street.
Okay, I think Athlone, the side streets, Athlone and Highcroft will be constructed in year 2. So that would be 2022. Correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but I believe that go ahead.
That's the presumption. The way the sewer system through the area works, the Byron works need to be done in advance of the side streets to allow sewer outlet for those streets. So it's all subject to contractor scheduling and timing on their end, which is obviously down the road. But the presumption would be that the Byron works would be year 1 and the side streets would be year 2. The sequencing and staging within that umbrella of time, we don't have any specific details on, but there'll be measures in the contract to ensure that it's done sort of in a successive manner and not just sort of haphazardly and left as a construction zone for an undue period of time.
Great. Our next question asks, the water main on Athlone will be going through the largest garden in Clare Gardens Park. Can the volunteer gardeners of Clare Gardens Park work with the construction team to move our plants to a holding area so we can reconstruct the garden when construction is completed?
That's a great idea. In fact, we encourage this type of community involvement prior to the construction. If there's plants like this that can be relocated, we can work with both the city parks and recreation people and the community to make sure that, these plants can be relocated and find a proper spot to locate them. So that's something that can be done. We also encourage all residents, if there's any, particular shrubs or flowers and, small trees in the right of way, any type of individual landscaping that they really, cherish a small bush, tree or bush that was planted in memory of a relative or something that they want to, they cherish that, to move that themselves, okay, prior to the construction. There's some things that, we will replace like for like. The contractor will replace like for like. We do an inventory of all existing vegetation and landscaping. But if there's some things that are really personal and you cherish that you want to do it yourself, we encourage that, to move that yourself.
Wonderful. Okay, our next question reads, with a total construction time of more than 2 full construction seasons, I assume there is a plan to stagger the work in stages so that each road affected will not be impacted throughout the entire construction period. This is especially important on Athlone as it is a dead end with a single access point, which adds to the challenges of an extended period of construction. When will the full schedule be shared?
Okay, the full schedule will only get a copy of it when we have the contractor on board and the contract is awarded. There's some things that we can put into the contract specifications to ensure that they don't do multiple constructions, which might constructions at multiple areas that might restrict a street or an intersection. We can incorporate, special items in the contractual specifications to ensure that there's always an access. In fact, it is a standard specification that there's access at all times. We can't just block off a street and isolate it. And we have to ensure that there's access to the residents and access for the various services, whether it be fire or ambulance, and basic services such as garbage and recycling. So at no time will the street be completely blocked off for long durations. There might be a small moving, there'll be an excavation with a single lane access around the excavation, but at no times will people be blocked off for long periods.
Wonderful. So essentially, access will be maintained throughout the construction project. Okay.
Correct.
So our next question reads, can you please work with the community around where the new trees will be planted in Clare Gardens Park? Often the city has planned on planting trees in the playing fields, which are quite popular for active play.
Yes, that can be done. Not a problem.
Wonderful. Okay. Our next question. What opportunities are you going to provide to further discuss the plan? After the January 8th request for input and before the final tendering, will there be any more options?
At this point, we're just planning one presentation, and we would post on the project website all the comments that we received today, and any comment that comes in afterwards. There's a consultation period. I think it goes up to the first week of January, where we receive all the comments from everyone, and we'll respond to every comment, question, concern. Everyone will get a response, and we'll identify what comments have been incorporated into the final design, the detailed design. So that will be tabulated in a log, and it will be posted on the project website. If
I may, so I've been through a lot of these, not as many as Kevin has. From tonight, you're going to email suggestions, concerns, issues to Kevin. I strongly encourage you to send those to me as well. I don't necessarily respect the drop dead date for comments. There will be some issues that are very contentious where I absolutely share with residents the need for a change. And so generally my advocacy for certain design changes continues past the date. Sometimes I'm able to achieve those and sometimes I'm not. But the way I like to work is to keep the residents who have raised the concern on whose behalf I'm advocating fully looped in. It's not a formal consultation mechanism, but you know, once we're out of sort of the formal system, my job is to continue working with residents to try to achieve changes that they and I feel are important, with no guarantees that we can necessarily achieve them. But tonight is not the only opportunity. You're going to take a look at the final, more detailed designs. There probably won't be, if you're raising really significant concerns, you probably won't have any surprises in there, because once I'm back in the office, I'm taking a vacation from my vacation tonight, but I am on vacation. But when I'm back in the office on January 4th, I'll begin the conversations about, you know, major changes that I feel are justified that are being asked for by the residents. And I'll be working with the residents who have raised them, as well as with the project team in a relatively open and sort of constant flow of dialogue way. But there will come a point at which staff say yes or no to something, and then they have to tender the contract. So thanks, Emma.
No problem. So our next question asks, is it possible to bury the hydro service along Byron?
Well, burying hydro is very expensive. And we have a limited budget envelope. We started our consultation process with hydro. Currently, the plan is to relocate the utility poles that are in the sidewalk itself. As you know, those poles have got pretty beat up with the sidewalk plows. It's not the location for a utility pole, and it reduces the width of the sidewalk, and it makes, you know, for difficult passage during the winter time. So we're going to be relocating. That's the plan. We can look into cost of burying it, but even that,
Kevin, I could step in on this question here. So it's not city policy to bury hydro. Hydro is the infrastructure for hydro is owned by hydro and not the city. So our plan is to move the utilities to allow us to construct the city infrastructure.
Exactly. Yeah. Even the cost to study the burying is very expensive. So I think money is better worth, you know, doing other type of works that are related to the infrastructure that we're replacing.
There's a number of us who obviously would love to see hydro poles buried as parts of this work. Keeping in mind what this is, which is replacing the infrastructure that's under the street, the water, etc., so that it doesn't fail. And then how you put the street back together on top of it is. It's small incremental cost, whether you put the street back with a cycle track, with a sidewalk, with speed bumps. You know, the big cost is digging up the street and then putting in the water main. But the hydro also putting in is on top of the work that actually needs to be done, and is unfortunately prohibitively expensive. It also imposes a really serious disruption on the residents who are affected, because of course the hydro then has to connect to their homes. And so we're digging up their lawns, and oftentimes they are having to rewire the internal wiring on their house. Unfortunately, burying hydro poles is beyond what the city can do right now. Thanks,
Okay,
Emma.
no problem. Next question. What is the rationale for adding a sidewalk on Athlone? This narrows the roadway and requires the removal of trees. It isn't consistent with other recent construction projects, such as on Tweedsmuir, where no sidewalk was added.
Well, the difference between Athlone and Tweedsmuir is that there's the Clare Gardens Park, and the justification was to provide access to the park. So.
Right. Okay. Our next question asks, under what circumstances will the existing cycle tracks on Churchill be connected to the proposed cycle tracks on Byron?
Okay.
That's
go ahead, Councillor.
so I think, there's a couple of ways in which that might get done. We had a good plan for Churchill, but we ran out of money in doing that. There are a number of developments that are occurring around in the area where I can't remember which one. I think there's one down on Scott where I have tried to allocate some of the Section 37 money to complete that connection. And then there is also the Byron Athlone Highcroft project, which moved ahead. It got approved recently. That has to be worked through as well on the south side of the street. So there might be a potential to do something there. But actually getting Churchill into the shape that it needs to be is unfunded right now. I do want to make sure I'm mentioning that at Byron Athlone Highcroft, there's going to be work done on the parklet there as part of the development, which has not been decided upon yet. And my strong emphasis to the project team is that they need to reach out to the developer sooner rather than later to begin discussions of what that might look like, because however that parklet is reconfigured, if it is reconfigured, is going to have a serious impact on what we do with this project.
Okay.
Right now, with respect to that, we're looking at providing just the connection of the services, so the sewer and the water, and the entrance, preparing an entrance on Highcroft for that connection to the parking of the development. And we're working with the city planners on that. So we're already started making provisions for the connections, and we've already started to look at what we're going to build in terms of curbs and sidewalks to ensure that none of which we build will be destroyed by the work started for the development. So we're going to ensure that we don't construct any surface which will be ripped up for the development. So there will be no throwaway costs at all. So we will coordinate with the developers via the city's planners.
All right. Our next question reads, a Q&A response is not acceptable. Citizens would like public consultation and not simply information sharing that is one way.
I get the frustration. Tonight is an open house, so fundamentally it is an opportunity to hear what the plan is before you begin to make comments. In ordinary times, this would be an open house where we would put the information up on boards, invite people to come and look at those boards, and then chat with the project team one-on-one. I actually kind of like this format because it does give the opportunity for the questions that you're raising to be heard by everyone. But the really important feedback that you're going to provide now is over the next several weeks, as you email that to me and to Kevin for that ongoing dialogue that's going to happen through until they have to make the final call.
And we've mentioned that all the presentation boards, et cetera, are online for viewing and review for a period of time as well, right, Kevin?
Correct. Up until the first week of January, and we're going to maintain them, and throughout the duration of the project, so they'll be continuously updated. The project website is the best place to go for information. So, like I said, all the comments that are in the Q&A section will be transcribed into a list, which we'll start responding, and they'll be all uploaded on the project website. So, you know, all the questions will be answered, and we'll be notifying you which actions will be taken.
All right. So, okay, sorry, one moment. I lost my place. Will there be access to the westbound raised cycle track when heading north from Dawson or Bevan? Or does a cyclist have to ride along Byron to access the cycle track at Tweedsmuir?
Robert, do you want to pull up the plan for Byron around Tweedsmuir? Just so we get the map, or maybe the general map that shows all the surrounding connecting streets.
Yep, just bear with me here 1 second.
Throughout, as I mentioned, well, Robert's pulling it up. As I mentioned, there's going to be a traffic management plan that looks at all aspects of managing traffic. So for each phase of the construction, pedestrian traffic, every intersection will have a step-by-step procedure of how we're going to provide for pedestrian traffic access around the construction site. Likewise for cyclists. So, Emma, can you come back on that question and
Yes.
name the streets?
Yes, sorry, apologies. It's access to the westbound raised cycle track when cycling north from Dawson or Bevan. So would they be able to access the cycle track from those streets, or would they have to ride along Byron and access the cycle track at Tweedsmuir?
So unfortunately, some of those streets aren't labeled, but with the connections being Tweedsmuir and Kirkwood, the expectation is the cyclists would have to travel to Kirkwood, cross over, and then backtrack a little bit. There's no plan for interconnects at each individual side street at this time. I don't know if that answers
I think that's one question we're going to have to take away and look at it specifically during the phasing of the works. We're planning to have a detour, a cycling detour on Wesley, and we'll have to look at we'll look at that specifically to see amongst other access egress routes how we'll prepare an action plan for detours for cyclists during construction for both years of construction.
Emma, with 15-ish minutes left, I'll ask you to sort of pick and choose for anything that is a topic area that hasn't been addressed yet.
Okay, I feel that we've addressed questions about the pathway going through Clare Gardens Park. It's going to be maintained with some changes. Discussed cycling. Okay, to what extent beyond the current side street surface widths will excavation be necessary?
Okay, Robert, do you want to answer that? That's more of like in general terms, the excavation on Highcroft is going to be just for the water main, so it's going to be fairly narrow. On Athlone, it'll be a little bit wider, but I'll let you answer that one, Robert.
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, for the side streets that aren't Athlone or Highcroft, the limited works will be just providing the interconnect for the sanitary sewer and the water main, and then the reconstruction of the intersection itself. So it will extend 10 or 15 meters at most up the side streets just to make those connections. And then for Highcroft, it'll be the water main construction, the full length, just half road width, and then Athlone, it'll be the full length, full road width, but it'll be staged so that the road can be maintained open in some form.
apologies, I'm just skimming through the questions here. There have been quite a few concerns raised about the accessibility of the street rebuild plans for Athlone. Residents are wondering, because the city has, experts in this field, will they be consulting directly with folks on Athlone who may have accessibility issues that need to be resolved as they build the plan for Athlone Avenue? Sorry, I paraphrased that because I lost the question in the phrase.
Actually, as we develop the design into detailed design, we have an ongoing review process with our AODA experts. So we get 30% development of the design, 60%, 90%, and each phase it goes through our AODA review process. So we will make sure that all AODA requirements are met. So
great.
The answer is yes.
Okay, so we have a question asking, will houses with lead water pipes on their property be notified by the city during the water main replacement?
Yes, we have a specific program called the Lead Service Replacement Program. We actually have, I think on the website, we have a link to that. If we don't, I'll make sure it's put up this week. We'll be replacing all services, the water main service connections from the main in the street right up to the right of way, the property line, and the resident can apply to this program for the replacement of the service from the property line to the house. So the resident can apply to that program. So that's one good point. I'll make sure we actually put that link on the project website. Wonderful. Robert, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that covers it, Kevin.
Okay, another question here. Can we make the two-way stop at Wesley and Athlone be converted to an all-way stop? This would help enforce the 30-kilometer-hour limit.
I'll have to take that one back and review that with our traffic department. So we'll definitely take note of that and we'll review it. Yeah.
It's they can bring that up with the traffic department. You might want to email me with that. That would be a change that's outside of the scope of what the engineers are working on. The designers, there are processes and things that the city has in place to determine whether or not all-way stops are warranted. And I'm more than happy to unpack that if you can write to me and Tom in the office.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything that we haven't already touched on. Okay. One individual asked if there were plans for more streetlights on any of the streets in question being constructed.
I don't believe we're touching the street lighting at all in this project. It's outside of scope. I think the street lighting is sufficient as far as I'm aware.
Wonderful.
On Byron, Kevin, just to jump in there on Byron, it's expected the street lighting will be replaced as part of the program because the alignment changes. But in terms of changing the actual lighting levels, if they're not up to current lighting standards, they'll be brought up to lighting standards. But beyond that, I don't envision any auxiliary lighting that'll be provided.
Okay.
Thank you.
We do have a question about snow removal. How will snow removal be addressed post-construction? The narrowing of Athlone Avenue, speed bumps, and curbs will further exacerbate the existing issues with extremely poor snow removal on a dead-end street.
All the traffic calming designs take into consideration all the snow removal, snow clearing, snow plowing procedures. So there won't be a problem, but we can always provide that question to Public Works.
Just to jump in, oh sorry, Councillor, just jump in there. The sidewalk would be winter maintained as well. So the current configuration, there's no pedestrian facilities, so it's the road maintenance. Snowbanks can start to limit what is out there for parking and pedestrian access. So with the sidewalk being provided, that expectation is that would be winter maintained to a better standard for pedestrians.
I'll just note that these designs go out through the city. So, the snow folks, for example, will see it. I know well that the snow folks look hard at these things. They really squawk when anything's going to make their job more difficult. Emergency services will have an opportunity to look at the plans, all the various different departments, and they are not shy about raising objections with the design team if they see anything that they foresee is going to be a problem.
Wonderful. Okay, so another question here. Will there be sidewalks on both sides of Highcroft?
No, we're only extending the existing sidewalk from the end of the sidewalk to Clare Street.
Right. Jeff, did you note any other questions in the Q&A that you wanted us to get covered? Or do you feel that we've addressed the most kind of like pressing questions?
I think there are a couple of questions in here that are worth consideration and answers with respect to parking removal and the potential that that's going to exacerbate parking pressures in the neighborhood, with one resident suggesting that, if things become a gong show with parking removal and increased parking questions, that could become dangerous for people over and above what's, the existing conditions are. So that is well worth, I would ask that resident write and chat with me about that one. There is a thread in the Q&A that suggests that the Athlone design is auto-centric. We've got 7 minutes left. So I don't, I would just ask that folks write to me about that, because from what I've seen, the team has, they've designed a street that meets the city council policy with respect to designing streets to slow traffic down to 30 kilometers an hour. That's what city council has voted on and told the engineers to do. And for the most part, I see that. So in your emails, can you please write to me just unpacking that for me? There was another question. Sorry, I think I just missed it. There was a question, if people don't want, it's a fundamental question, a good segue into sort of next steps. If people don't want the traffic calming, do they have any influence over that? So that, is a fundamental question for this evening. The traffic calming has been designed into this project in order to achieve the goals that the design team has of reducing traffic speeds to 30 kilometers per hour. One of the frustrations that we have is that on street after street after street across Kitchissippi, we're being asked to slow traffic speeds down. And I have a very limited toolkit of what I can actually do to do that, because the streets are designed to accommodate speeds that are 50 or 60 kilometers per hour. We won't rebuild, so the only opportunity to actually get proper speed reductions on our streets is when we rebuild them, to rebuild them designed to keep speeds down to 30 kilometers an hour. These streets won't be rebuilt. Sorry, Kevin, how many years has the water main been in operation? 80 years?
80 years, yes, yeah. 80 years.
So we, it's 50 years before we can think about rebuilding this street, most likely. And in the course of those 50 years, residents are going to come and go. And as what I'm finding in the office is that young families move in and they start asking for traffic calming to slow the speeds down. And I'm often frustrated because in the absence of the ability to rebuild the street properly, I can't. So if you're concerned about the traffic calming, it is important that you tell both Kevin and I that. Unpack the reasons why you're concerned about the traffic calming. What are the effects that you see? And then, over the course of the next month or so, we'll have that discussion. There are some things that I can see myself advocating with the city to remove, like, speed bumps further down Athlone might be overkill. But putting a sidewalk in and having intersection narrowings on Athlone make a lot of sense in terms of the kinds of demands that residents who are going to move into your street over the course of the next 50 years are likely going to make. Residents do have influence. You have the ability to convince me to advocate for change. You have the ability to advocate directly with Kevin for change. This is nothing that you've seen here tonight is a done deal, except I guess like the size of the sanitary sewer that you are proposing to put in. I completely leave that to these folks to determine how many millimeters the sani has to be. But please, we'll have that dialogue over the course of the next month. If you didn't have an opportunity to pose your question this evening, or if your question didn't get read out loud, please do send it in to Kevin and I. I'm going to ask Emma before we end this, just to do a copy and paste on all the questions that were asked that have been unanswered so far.
I have already done so.
Oh, you are amazing. And if you want that list, please just write to my office and we'll fire that through to you. Tom is out of the office until the 28th. I am out of the office until the 4th, but we have plenty of time once both Tom and I are back to engage in that discussion. And Emma, have you put the project website into the chat?
I can do that right now.
I am going to guess that most of the people on this call are familiar with it, but just in case, before we shut this down, we'll post that and you can do a quick copy and paste job in the chat room.
Absolutely. Just one moment. My internet is extremely slow. Okay. So there's the link to the project website. And there's also contact information for everyone that's spoken tonight available at that website as well. The plans will be available so you can comment on them and give your feedback in an ongoing fashion.
Amazing. And Nicole, you've posted a lot of questions this evening. The one that you've just posed at 8:28 with respect to the vehicle centric, I'm intrigued and I would like to know more. Please email me. With that, I will just say thank you very much, Kevin, Robert, Graham, and thank you very much, Emma. And thank you mostly to residents who joined us this evening for the discussion. I'm looking forward to continued discussions over the course of the next several weeks. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
All right.